drink. I like it. Another!
You are a vain, greedy, cruel boy!
And you are an old man and a fool!
There is a monster in Central City.
Don't mock me.
Go f*** yourself.
They're just kids.
No, they were kids.
You can't kill an entire race.
Why not?
Hello, hey guys, I'm Danielle Radford. I am one of the hosts and writers for Fandom, and welcome to another installment of Hey Fandom, our new interview series where we bring fans and creators together. As some of you know, I'm a huge comic book nerd, and I'm a huge movie nerd, so I am so pumped for this opportunity to talk to the writer of Thor and X-Men First Class, Zack Stentz. But this is Fandom. At Fandom, we are all about sharing the love. So I'm not going to hog him with just my questions. I'm not going to hog him just with the community questions. I will also be reaching out, and for you all, if you have any questions that you would like to ask as well. So if you want to join us to ask a question live on video, first of all, if you're on YouTube, thank you, YouTube. But if you want to ask a question, come on over to our shindig, come hang out. You can get your burningest questions answered. And if you want to do that, hit the raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen, or if you have a text question, you don't necessarily want to be on camera, you can hit the question mark at the bottom of the screen. So you can go and do that, and that will let people know. And if you want to get on camera, what will happen is they will go over to you, make sure that your mic is working, that your lights are on, that your camera is working, and then we can get those questions answered for you. It's all very exciting. I'm very happy that you guys are here. So our charity partner for Hey Fandom is Direct Relief. Direct Relief is working globally to provide protective equipment and essential medical items to health workers responding to COVID-19. If you would like to donate, please go to fandom.link/donate. All right, so Zack Stentz has written for some of the most popular comic book and action franchises in both movies and television. In the first Thor movie, he introduced the Nordic god to both wider audiences and into the MCU. In X-Men First Class, he revived the X-Men movie franchise with new interpretations of beloved characters. He's also written episodes of The Flash, served as writer and story editor of the Sarah Connor Chronicles. He was also a producer on Fringe. All of these are things that you should definitely watch after you're done with this if you have not seen them yet. I am very excited. We are going to go ahead and bring on our guest. Hello.
Hey, it's wonderful to be here. And I guess if you like comic books and movies, I am right at the middle of that little Venn diagram.
Yeah, that's perfect. You're right at the center of that where you get all of the colors. So we have some great questions for you. We'll be having some fan questions. And thank you so much for joining us today this afternoon. My first question is, so we're talking a lot, obviously, about comic book movies. You have done comic book movies. You've done your own original material as well. So how do you approach doing comic book material? Is it something that you approach differently than your other material or original material? And if so, how so?
Well, the difference between doing original material and doing comic book material is, of course, you have oftentimes 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years of comic book canon, and often other films that have gone before you to either draw on or to try and contrast yourself from. So it's much more of, you're much more of an interpreter, and it's much more about finding the originality and finding the new and the fresh thing to say about a character that in many cases the audience knows already, instead of starting with the blank sheet of paper, or in my case the blank screen with a blinking cursor at the top.
Right. Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. So we do, we also have a wiki, and we have a very, very popular wikis. And so according to our X-Men wiki sleuths, we have a little bit of trivia here. Cyclops and Storm are both briefly featured as children during the First Class Cerebro sequence. Were there any X-Men characters you would have loved to write for that you didn't get a chance to include?
In X-Men First Class, during the drafts that Ash and I wrote of X-Men First Class, we went through so many different mutants. I mean, there was always going to be the core of Eric and Charles and Raven, but the supporting character, and Beast. But the supporting characters were like, there were so many different variations on them. Probably my favorite came from a draft before we started working, and I will say the writer did a really clever thing. He had Banshee and he had Dazzler, and he had them combine their powers so that when because Dazzler makes light out of sound, and his sound was so intense that she made it into lasers, and I was like, that's really cool and clever, and that might be fun to do. But I think they were saving Dazzler for the Studio 54 years of the X-Men. So we ended up with the team that you saw. One on the villain side. Up until late in the game, we were going to have Sunspot, which was really cool, because there's something neat about the idea of Sebastian Shaw showing up, and he's got Emma Frost and he's got Sunspot, he's got fire and ice on either side of them, and that would have there's something that would have been cool about that. But I think they couldn't figure out how to do the Sunspot effect, so they went with the Tornado Dude instead.
Did I love Tornado Dude? And I do love Dazzler. It would have been interesting though to see a little bit of a Dazzler and the Banshee put together with the lasers, because I always like sound lasers, man. More lasers. Next question that I have: there is an Easter egg in Thor which is a reference to his alter ego Donald Blake. How do you decide which aspects of the comic you're going to go deep on versus which ones you're just kind of casually reference for hardcore fans?
That is an excellent question. How do you choose, again, from the huge amount of canon and different interpretations, what you're, which ones you're going to do and which ones you're going to leave behind? There was a lot of discussion on whether we were going to use the Donald Blake persona for Thor, because it was very back in the 1960s when Thor was invented, everyone had the alter ego and everyone had the disguise. But in Thor's case, he had a completely different physical build. It was before they had figured out how to do the wimpy Steve Rogers into Captain America thing. And it would have essentially been the same. If you would have used the same actor, it would have been the same effect. So we very early in the game decided that the Donald Blake thing was just too complicated, and that was a writer who came subsequent to us, the late great Don Payne, I think, who came up with the little way of putting the Donald Blake in as the Easter egg. So even when you can't incorporate kind of areas of the mythos, it's fun to have the little hand wave. I know Ragnarok did the really fun really fun little reference of Thor being turned into the frog from the famous Frog of Thunder thing, and we had. I remember in the draft, it didn't make it into the final version. We had a couple of coded references even to Beta Ray Bill from the Simonson run. So you have to, in interpreting a comic book into a movie, you have to let it stand as its own thing, and not all of the elements are going to work and are going to work equally well in both mediums. But I think honestly, that's the central genius of Feige of Kevin Feige, who's in charge of the MCU when he came along, was simply not being embarrassed by their own material and not feeling like they had to apologize for it. If you look at a lot of the comic book adaptations that had come before that, there's a lot of either kind of winking at the material that it's based on, or even condescending to it. I very much like the first X-Men movie, but the whole, probably the most dated thing about it is that they're all in the black leather Matrix gear, and what's his name? Cyclops is like, what, you'd rather we have yellow spandex? And it's but now that we're in 2020, I think audiences are like, yeah, we would like the yellow spandex. And one of the things that we were proud of in First Class is that we were able to kind of work in something that looked more like the classic uniforms in a way that felt organic rather than just kind of silly.
Oh, that's great. And speaking of complicated, that is something that I want to touch on later because I've got some questions about some of the complexities that I noticed in Thor. But we do have some fan questions I want to get to because, again, I don't want to monopolize all of your time because I could do this literally all day.
Yeah, like Steve Roth, I could do this all day.
Exactly. So we have a video question, and our first video question is coming from Logan. So Logan.
Excellent name, Logan.
Hello, thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for joining us, Logan. What's your question?
So my question is this. What's it like when you kind of bring characters to the screen for the first time only to have them go into other people's creatives' hands? And do you like what the other writers and directors have done with Thor and the X-Men that you brought to the franchise?
When you work on a big franchise like this, even on the movie that you're working on, you are one of hundreds of people. And you're usually not the only, with a very few exceptions, shout out to Michael Green. You are not the only writer. You're not going to be the only writer on that. And I like to think of it. I like to think of being part of this big franchise that's been around for decades. Is like you're like a craftsman on one of those cathedrals. On one of the cathedrals that got built that took like hundreds of years to build, and you'd be working on something, and you weren't going to live to see the end of it. But you could still. What you do is you take pride in the part of it that you know that you contributed to, and you know that you are not responsible for the entire whole, but you're responsible for your part of the whole. And then, it is tough sometimes when you introduce a character and then, other people take them and run with it. And sometimes they do things that you like with the characters and sometimes they don't. A lot of people were like, oh, you must have been so mad at Taika Waititi, making Ragnarok a comedy. And I was like, no, it was like he did a great job. And two, he probably understood more than, for all of the comedy, he understood more than anyone since Ken, the first director, that the fundamental building block of a Thor movie is the Thor-Loki relationship and the weird mixture of love and anger and resentment all rolled into one. So it was, as a fan, it was delightful watching that movie and watching. It's like, yeah, this guy gets it. And I ran into Hiddleston at the after party, and I was like, yeah, he really got who Loki was in a way that maybe not all of the directors who have directed Loki have. And it's like, yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
So long-winded answer, but I hope that gets to what you were asking.
Definitely. No, that's a great analogy. And it's been so fun to see that particular relationship grow over so many movies and under so many people's direction that it's cool to see it as one collaborative vision.
Thank you. And absolutely agree.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Logan. Thank you for that question. Very, very good question. All right. So next we have a text question, which is coming in from Henry. Text question coming in from Henry. And Henry asks, what were your conversations like with Kevin Feige as you wrote Thor? You knew Avengers was in the works, but was it clear they had really ambitious plans for where they wanted to go long term?
I mean, let me think about that question for a moment. Yes, it was clear that in their wildest dreams, they wanted this to go on and for all of these to be a great success. When they came out of the gate with the kind of the master plan for the MCU very strong with the first Iron Man, which in my mind is still one of the greatest MCU films. And then they, I would say that, to use a baseball analogy, they got on base with the Hulk movie, the second Hulk movie, but it wasn't as big of a success. So it was the big question at the time when we were writing on it is, okay, when there's the Avengers, is it going to be a team of equals, or is it going to be Iron Man and his friends? So a lot was riding on Thor and then Captain America, the first Captain America, being successful, so that it could be a more balanced team. And there was always the plan for Loki to be the villain in the Avengers. So that was an executive actually told us at one point, it's like, if you fail at everything else, just give us a villain as good as Magneto. That's what, we need a cool villain because we want to use him. We want to use him a lot. And we realize our villains have not been up to that Magneto standard thus far. So, there was a lot of attention to the whole movie, but a particular amount of attention to getting the Loki character right, making him a compelling character. And, probably the other big challenge was simply that, Iron Man succeeded partly by being very grounded and very, it's very much takes place in our world. And then all of a sudden, hi, here's a space Viking with a magic hammer that makes him fly. And making that work in the same world as, SHIELD and, power suits and terrorism and things like that. That was a big challenge, but I'd like to think that we succeeded enough that now you see the MCU and it has all kinds of different aspects. It has the very grounded science fiction street level aspect. It has the outer space adventure part, and now it has magic in the occult, and that's part of the fun of a big comic book universe, is that you can play in each of those sandboxes, and then you can take all your Lego sets and dump them all together, and have them fight and have them interact, and I think people really dig that.
Okay, I'm definitely getting more into that later because I have some stuff that I want to know about that too. You keep pitching me up for good stuff. First of all, I want to say if anyone has any questions they would like to ask, especially if you're on YouTube, come on over to Shindig. You can ask us some questions here. Go ahead and raise your hand for a video question or hit the question mark if you have a text question. We have a video question coming in right now, and this is a video question from Kate. Hello, Kate.
Hi, Kate.
So I was just wondering, how closely did you work with the directors from the original X-Men movies? And did you guys ever discuss how you would interpret the characters?
That is a really good question. With X-Men First Class, the director of the first two X-Men movies was actually an executive producer on the project, and came up with the original story that ended up being built into it. So the original director was very involved. But I think as it evolved and as the new director, Matthew Vaughn, came on board, we felt more and more empowered to say, okay, let's honor the original, let's honor the first three films, or the first two films in particular, but let's also make sure that this can stand on its own. And if there's a bit of continuity from the first one that's kind of holding up the storytelling in the new one, let's not worry about it too much. I actually like that the X-Men movies kind of had a looser view of continuity, and were more driven by what's the best story right now. I'll give you a quick example. There's a blink and you miss it line in the first X-Men movie about how Charles and Eric have known each other since they were 17. And so in the first drafts of X-Men First Class, we bent ourselves into pretzels, my former writing partner and I, trying to come up with a prologue scene of the two of the characters at age 17 meeting each other, and then not meeting each other again for another, until 1962, when the events of the movie take place. And at some point we realized, And I think the new director realized, no one except the original director remembers that line. No one really cares. And it's slowing down the story, and it's keeping us from getting started, and do we really need 3 minutes just to do that once, just to do a scene to reference one line from the first movie? So that got thrown out, and then the movie begins the way that it does now. I'm right there with you. I got stuff going on in the other room too. But I hope that answers your question.
We're on.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kate, for joining us. And thank you for answering such a great question. So we have another question. We have a text question from Freddie. So Freddie asks, originally it sounded like First Class was going to be more of a full reboot, but then it became more connected to the earlier X-Men movies. Was there some back and forth on that?
It was always going to be loosely, I think it was always going to be loosely connected to the earlier ones. It was always going to be a soft rather than a hard reboot, which is to say it was going to take elements from the original ones, but go off on its own. These were, you were supposed to be seeing Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen as young men. But yes, I think as it evolved, and I think Tom Rothman, who was in charge of Fox at the time, got a gleam in his eye that it's like, what if we could have the young ones and the old ones together in the same movie? And I think they already were beginning to have the idea for Days of Future Past. So I think as that began to solidify, it was more, okay, let's have the cameo from Rebecca Romaine. Let's do a little more to let the audience know that this is a prequel and not, that this is simultaneously a prequel and a soft reboot.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so I have a question that I want to ask, and to set this up, we have a clip from X-Men First Class that we're going to play because I have something that is going to relate to that. So first, let's get into the clip. All right, so you mentioned when you were talking about this, that was a great question about how you go about, you forgetting what came from the other directors, things that other people would, they're the only ones who are going to know this stuff. You had a really tough task, again, making your prequel because you wanted to set up these characters to become the versions of themselves that we had already known from the previous movies. So how do you go about, again, laying that groundwork for those characters that they would become while still giving them room to grow? That example that you gave about, not worrying about certain lines was great, but I know there've got to be other kind of routes that you have to go to so you can make sure that they still have the room to become the characters that we love.
That is such a good question. And I would say when you do a prequel to characters and movies that are well-known and beloved, you always, you have two basic choices. One choice is to portray the characters as basically the same people, but younger. It's like Charles is in charge to, but maybe he has more, but he has hair. Ooh. Eric is still, Magneto and angry at humans and all of those things. Or you have what, in my mind, is the more interesting option, which is to show these characters as recognizable but different people. And the story that you tell in the course of the prequel is these are the events and these are the choices that these characters made that set them on the path to becoming the characters who we know and love in the present. So you get both the kind of inevitability of knowing where that journey ends, but you have the surprises of how it happens. In this case, like he's walking around. Clearly, at some point in the past, he ends up in a wheelchair. Oh my God, his best friend accidentally was responsible for it. Well, that's pretty fraught. Those are the kind of decisions that can make prequels really, really fun. It was really fun to make, instead of the very upright Patrick Stewart, he's, the first time that you see him talking about genetics, he's trying to pick up a girl. He's trying to pick up a girl in a bar. And he's a much more, he's a good guy, but he's a little bit on the more callow side. And you get to see him start the process of growing into that wonderful, authoritative teacher character who we know and love in the earlier films. So that's, those are the kind of challenges of the prequel, and it's a challenge because, you could very well, I liked Solo better than a lot of people did, but one of the big complaints that you heard about Solo was, they made the choice, okay, let's show the guy who becomes Han Solo, but a Han Solo who isn't confident and cocky, do you really want to watch that guy? It's a big chunk of the audience said no, maybe not so much. And so it was a totally legitimate creative decision, but it was one that was kind of at odds with the kind of pleasure of the character to begin with. So those are tough choices that you make in adaptation in doing prequels, and both paths are fraught in their own way.
Oh man, kind of happy I don't have to do that. I mean, those came out great, but that sounds really difficult. And then also having to deal with backlash and blah, blah, blah. We have some more fan questions I'm really excited about. And again, don't forget, if you're watching from YouTube, you want to get in here and ask some questions, come on over to Shindig. If you're already in here, if you want to do a video question, make sure you raise that hand. Somebody will come and help you out. Make sure that your audio, your video is looking good. If you want to ask a text question, hit the question mark. And we have a text question here from Hector. And Hector would like to know, Thor is a very Kenneth Branagh movie in the Shakespearean ways it handles the character drama. Yes. Did he actively participate with you in the writing, or did he just take off from your script?
Ken was very active through the whole writing process. We came up with an outline that was kind of loosely based on some beats that they had given us, with a lot of changes that we made in it. It turns out that the beats were actually by J. Michael Straczynski, who had done a very acclaimed run on the comic book and ended up sharing story credit on the end movie. We turned that outline into a draft, and then Ken brought us in, and we sat in a room 4 hours, for 4 hours every morning with Ken, with Kevin Feige, and with 3 or 4 other executives going over the script page by page, line by line, with him saying, I like this, I don't like this. I'm not sure if I like this or not. Let's act it out together. And you realize you're running a scene with like the greatest Shakespearean actor of his day. And, like he had his sleeves, we were the ones writing it, but he had his sleeves rolled all the way up and had his hands in the guts of the story right there with us. So he played a very, very active role in shaping that story. Though God bless him, he didn't, he viewed that as the director's job, and he didn't think he should share writing credit for doing that. Not every director is like that.
I'm sorry. I'm still lost over the idea that you get to like do scene study with Kenneth Branagh, which is amazing.
Yeah. Here's a little secret though. He is such a good actor that he can make a bad line sound good.
Oh, then you're trapped.
Exactly. It's like, I don't know if I like this line or not. And he'll read it so well. It's like, Yeah, you made it sound good, but it's not a good line. So you'd have to separate that out from the fact that he's just a great actor from, that's like, what Patrick Stewart did the first couple years of Next Generation was, I'm going to sell the hell out of some oftentimes not very good scripts.
All right, we have a video question coming up from Jane. Jane? Hello, Jane. Thank you for joining us.
Anyways, my question is, most of the characters that you write for have like just decades and decades of history with them, and so what I want to ask is, when you're adapting it to like a 2-hour screenplay or something, how do you pick the very best parts to adapt and which parts to leave out?
That is a very good question. That's a very, very good question, Jane. And the answer is, it depends on what you want to accomplish. It depends on what you want to accomplish with the story. When you're telling an origin story, I'll give the example of Thor. You're telling the origin story. There are very fundamental beats to that. We know that, essentially Thor was cast out for being arrogant and was sent to Earth to learn humility by his dad. That's a pretty good general idea, but then the specifics of it are all up in the air. Okay, it's like, we know Loki is going to be up to no good at one point, but like, okay, what's the adversary? We went through a lot of different versions before it was like, okay, it's going to be the Destroyer is going to be the big thing that he has to fight, and there's going to be the war with the Frost Giants and things like that. So it's in some ways you know what you're doing, again, especially if you're doing an origin story, and in other ways you're kind of choosing from a vast 50-year-old Chinese menu of options, and you just have to do the ones that feel good to you, that feel good to the director, and that kind of make sense for the story. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jane. That was great.
Yeah.
All right, up next, we have a text question from Bobby. And Bobby would like to know, at what point in the process of making Thor was Chris Hemsworth cast, and how did he influence the character?
Chris Hemsworth was cast towards the end of our script writing process. Interestingly, when we started writing, I think a big reason why we got the assignment to begin with is my partner at the time and I had a lot of experience in TV, and we started at the end of 2008, beginning of 2009. They were originally planning for it to be a 2010 movie. Oh. So it was like, we need a draft in 3 weeks. Okay, we need the next one in 2 weeks. We were writing incredibly quickly, and they got us, I think, partly because they knew TV writers can do that. And then at some point during the process, they essentially flipped the Iron Man 2 and Thor dates. Oh. So we became a 2011, and they became a 2010. So then they had more time, and they ended up bringing on Don Payne to bring more humor into it, and doing, I think a lot of the Marvel intern program people did writing on it, and so there are lines here and there that are from them. I think Nicole Perlman might have even contributed, because she was in that program at the time, working on what would become Guardians of the Galaxy. So when they were casting Thor, they essentially saw every blonde 6'3" or above dude who was, well known or not. They had, like Liam Hemsworth came in. Alex Skarsgård was one of the finalists. Charlie Hunnam was one of the finalists. And I think the thing that Ken saw in Chris is that charm and that sense of humor. And it was so necessary for the character. And I don't think that the writing for the character really changed a lot because of him, but what he brought to it was the ability to unapologetically make Thor a jerk in the first half of the movie, because he is so freaking charming that you will love him that you are confident that the audience isn't going to say, I hate this guy, why am I watching him? They're like, when he goes, he's in the coronation room and he goes down on his knee in front of his mom and he winks. It's like, yeah, he's the friend who's going to get you arrested and get you into trouble, but you love him anyway. So that's, that was the great genius of that casting of Hemsworth. And I think we've seen that in the films that he's done since then, is that he's this amazing comedic actor in the body of a literal god.
Some people truly get to have it all.
Yeah. Although the funny thing is when Chris was cast, he was a tall, sturdy dude, but he was skinny. He was a surfer. He had a surfer build. And they're like, go to the gym. And he got so into working out that over the course of filming, they had to let out his costume because he just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Them's a lot of chickens he ate, I guess. Oh, we've got
whole flocks of chickens. I'm so sorry. So sorry, chickens.
Sorry, chickens. So much protein. Oh, up next, we have a video question from Charles. Hello, Charles.
Hello.
Hey, Charles.
How are you guys doing?
Doing great, thank you.
Doing well.
So I wanted to know, you said that you wrote both Thor and X-Men First Class with a writing partner, Ashley Edward Miller. I was wondering what that process was like. Did you guys write scenes separately and then come together, or were you both parsing out dialogue? What was it like to write those movies together?
Every writing partnership is different. I know there are a lot of writing partnerships where the partners are in the room together, and one of them's over the keyboard, and the other one, they're slaving over every comma and semicolon together. Ash and I did not write that way because weirdly we actually started writing together in the late '90s before we were professionals on opposite coasts over email. And so our writing method was to sit in a room together and break story, which is, get the beats of the story out, get it outlined together. And then once we had it outlined, we'd split up the writing, and it was different with each script. Sometimes one of us would take the first half, the other would take the last half. Another time, one of us would do act 1 and 3, and the other one would do the long act. The other one would do the long act 2. So we'd split up. We'd each write half, and then we'd pass the halves back and forth to make sure and rewrite each other until the voice kind of smoothed out and was unified through the whole thing. So that was our writing method on Thor and X-Men First Class. And it I know a lot of writing teams that wouldn't have worked for, but again, it's different with each team.
That's awesome. That's
great. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much for joining us, Charles. Thank you. That's a great question. All right. So, Zach, we have another clip. We are going to play a clip from Thor, and then I'm going to ask questions about that. So first, let's go ahead and play the Thor clip.
Yeah, look. Your ancestors called it magic, and you call it science. Well, I come from a place where they're one and the same thing.
What is that?
My father explained it to me like this, that your world is one of the 9 realms of the cosmos, linked to each other by the branches of Yggdrasil, the world's tree. Now you see it every day without realizing. The images glimpsed through, what did you call it, this Hubble telescope. Hubble telescope.
Tell me more.
So the 9 realms.
on that scene. All right, so part of setting up, obviously, the origin story, and Thor did a lot of heavy lifting, and that might be something I get into later. Thor did a lot more heavy lifting than I think a lot of people realize, but part of it was, as you said, you had to set up the cosmic part of Marvel. Everything so far had been so grounded. So was there kind of a ton of pressure put on Thor? Like if Thor didn't work, would that be something that affected, say, Guardians later or any of the other cosmic stuff later?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of those things were still a twinkle in Kevin Feige's eye at that point. But yeah, Thor needed to work. Thor needed to convincingly sell the idea that space Viking with magic hammer that flies lives in the same world as Iron Man and Captain America. And our approach to it from the very beginning was to rely heavily on the famous Arthur C. Clarke line, which we actually paraphrase in the movie a couple of different times, which is any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Mm-hmm. So magic, science, same thing, just different, just talking about it in different ways. So what that meant in the writing is that it was incredibly liberating. We didn't have to, as long as we said that, we didn't have to explain how everything worked. We didn't have to explain how they could go through outer space but are using swords and shields and spears. We didn't have to explain, like, what's the hammer? It's from the heart of a dying star. Does it like, how does it fly though? Does it have a little motor in it? Like, you don't need to, it's just, don't worry about it. It's so advanced that it might as well be, magic. So, and imagine not having to have those scenes of explaining all of those things to the audience and having them go with it. Like Thor would not have worked at all if we had to spend all kinds of screen time justifying it, because that screen time that you have explaining how everything works, that's time that you're taking away from character interactions and drama and comedy and action and all the reasons that audiences actually go and see movies, not to see explained how Mjolnir works.
Yeah, that's a TED Talk. I don't think that's not like
exactly.
a summer blockbuster.
Exactly.
That's a dissertation. Next we have a text question from Mantis. Which company was more interesting to work with, Marvel or DC?
That's a good question. Interestingly, I have done comic book, movie, and TV work for Marvel, for the Fox Marvel characters, which are now no more. Pour one out for them. And for DC, and they're all really different from each other. The MCU, as everyone knows by now, is the one that kind of broke the mold by being the first company out there with a master plan that it's all going to be one big tapestry, and that all of the different characters are going to fit into, and at some point they're going to interact with each other in these, Avengers movies that make $2 billion. Working on X-Men First Class, which is technically a Marvel thing, but like the MCU had no connection or power over it. It was a weird, fraught negotiation between those camps. It was much more filmmaker driven, and they played much faster and looser with continuity. And then with DC, it was really interesting in that they have their TV world and their movie world in the two different silos, and a lot of time it's this game of playing blind man's bluff when you're writing for one of the TV shows, and you get the person from corporate coming in, and you're like, can I use this character? No. Can I use this character? No. Can I use? No. And you realize it's like, yeah, we already have these characters in another show, or more likely in a movie. In some cases, with the TV shows, they had characters who they were using for the TV show, and they were told, no, you can't have, we can't have King Shark anymore on the Flash because he's going to be in the Suicide Squad, and that comes first. And then on the movie side, like working on Booster Gold, it seemed to change a lot. Like at one point it was, we've got the master plan, we've got the DCEU. And then I think after, the well-publicized things that happened with Justice League, I think, and then the surprise, runaway success of Wonder Woman, it became much more, just make a good move, just write a good script, and we'll figure out later how much or how little we want to integrate it in with the rest of the universe. And so, without giving away too many spoilers, the Booster Gold script that I wrote for Greg and for DC was, it had references to other DC characters, but it's not like, like you didn't see Batman walking around.
Right. Yeah.
Pattinson or Affleck.
No Pattinson, no Affleck. Got to get the two of them together. Do like a Bat of Future Past or something. We have one last question. Thank you again so much. We have one last. This is a text question. Our last fan question coming in from Henry, and Henry is asking. He says, or they say, you and Josh Trank were recently tweeting about a version of Fantastic Four that you wrote. Can you talk about what your approach to those characters was?
Yes. To those of you who don't know, Josh Trank was the director of the last Fantastic Four movie, which, shall we say, got mixed reception. And it is not as well known, but Ash, my former partner, and I were the first writers on that version of the movie. The problem that happened was that the studio had Ash and I writing the movie while Josh was still in post-production on Chronicle, his big breakthrough hit. He didn't know that we were doing that. They didn't tell him that, we've got the writers of X-Men First Class working on this. You're gonna love it. So when they were like, okay, you ready to do the Fantastic Four? Here's the script. Josh, in his own words, his reaction was like, no, I want to do my version of it. I want to work with a writer that I know. And so our script did not end up getting used. And at the time, it was a really heartbreaking thing because we had really poured our heart and soul into that Fantastic Four movie. And since then, Josh and I have become friends, and we've moved beyond that in a way that I find very emotionally. It's always nice to put kind of old bad blood behind. Really? And I will say our approach was very different than the one that you saw on screen. It was similar in the sense that we used that, like that movie, we used the Ultimates as the basis much more than the original continuity. It was kind of our two big things that we drew on were the first run of the Ultimates, and then the Ed Brubaker books of Doom. And I would say it was a lot more similar in tone to X-Men First Class. And it was, I like to say it was the script was the tragedy of how the Fantastic Four were nearly the Fantastic Five. That originally, that even though he was this dark, difficult guy, originally Victor Von Doom was a dear friend of Reed, as in the original continuity. But unfortunately, through the events that we depicted, he was a too wounded, too damaged, and too angry character to accept his own heroism, and he made the choice to go down the very dark path to become the armored megalomaniac we all know and love. But this is, you're supposed to actually, you're supposed to enjoy the team coming together, but there's also a certain degree of sadness and tragedy of the fact that they have to fight someone who decided that power was more important than friendship. So very proud of the script. Very bummed that it didn't get made, but that's show business, right?
Really, really is. I do. That's always been a take that I really like, the idea that they were these best friends, and then there was this betrayal just based out of jealousy and heartbreak, and that would have been really interesting to have watched. We are actually going to start wrapping up. This was so much fun. Thank you so much for coming in and answering all of our questions and listening to me ramble. This was fantastic.
Oh, yeah, you were such a fantastic hostess, and I loved your questions and the ones that were chosen by other people. So I hope everyone enjoyed it, and I'm gonna get back to work and hopefully make some new things for all of you.
Thank you for coming and hanging out. Go make things. Can't wait to see what all of those things wind up being. Thank you so much. This was so much fun.
Goodbye, everyone. Take care.
Bye. And thank all of you for coming and hanging out with us today. I had a great time. Once more, we want to thank our charity partner, Direct Relief, and encourage all of you to donate to them, which you can do at fandom.link/donate. Thank you once again to our guest, and thank you to all of you for joining us for another Hey Fandom. And we will be back with another installment tomorrow, as in tomorrow, Friday at 5 p.m. with John Wick director Chad Stahelski for another Hey Fandom. Thank you so much, and we will see you back here tomorrow. Bye.